Well, hi, Simon. It's taken us a year to get here. We've been having our regular chats over a year.
We have.
So I'm absolutely delighted that today we can bring you to the Eldership to Leaders community and introduce you and your work and your wonderful self to the community as well, and bring all your wisdom that you have to bring as well. So today our theme is Rites of Passage. So I particularly felt like you were in my awareness around that. It feels like that's the part of, well, an integral part of the discussions we've been having over the past year with each other. I'm going to introduce you a little bit to Simon, but I'll also let you, Simon, introduce yourself as well, and anything else you want to introduce to the community. So Simon, you first came in contact with me through a podcast that I did with Gary Turner.
Yes.
Where we were talking everything eldership, and what was lovely was that kind of when I met you and kind of find out more about you was to discover kind of the journey that you've been on, almost like the rites of, I'm going to say the rites of passages, because I think it's not just one, and kind of understanding your background in that you went to boarding school and that you worked for JP Morgan, and you're sat there now with your beautiful artwork and about to do an exhibition of your artwork as well. So that's just to me an amazing example of how you can be in one place or many places and then find yourself somewhere else as you kind of get a little bit older as well. So I'll kind of pass this over to you to introduce yourself a little bit more to the community and to say more about, a little bit about your journey, just so that kind of brings you to the community and to this conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Zena. And it's always been such a joy connecting with you. And thank you, Gary. Yeah, well, I mean, I think I always have a sort of desire to tell everyone my age, almost as partly a sort of justification that I'm allowed to talk about this stuff. But I'm 63, so there we go. But why do I bring that in partly because I am now retired, and maybe I'm sure we'll loop back to that sort of particular gateway. But my curiosity about being an elder, eldership, elderhood, whatever we call it, I think it goes back to actually, in a way, partly my work. So I was in the wonderful world of asset management, which kind of was an interesting ride over something like 36 years in the city. But the area that I particularly, for me, I was involved in was looking after corporate clients with their pension schemes. So where they're invested, but also the whole wider context of what people were doing, how they were approaching retirement, saving for retirement, etc. Now, while that was mainly very much focused on financial returns, and would people have enough money to retire, basically, I suppose there were wider themes that kept on occurring for me around how do you prepare for this next stage of your life, and an awareness that demographically my generation were shock horror getting older, and that they were beginning or already had begun to retire or were well into retirement. I'm part of the baby boomers, just at the edge of it. But so I kind of thought, what are these people doing? And because I was out seeing companies and sometimes had to present to the company workforces, not very often, but I kind of got quite a good flavor of what people were thinking. And I was always curious to go beyond we talked about money and savings and who are you, and what are your plans? You know, what do you want to do? What are your hopes? What are your fears? All of that. And anyway, I ended up sort of really trying to explore that more and more, and that curiosity has sort of spilled over into my journey into retirement. You know, that sense of, you know, if all else goes well and we've got our health, and I mean, I don't take that for granted as well. But you know, what are we going to do with our lives? And you know, some people might think, well, that's a big question, Simon, but I think it's a very relevant one, given this is my last stage of life. I mean, it might last, you know, another minute, 6 months, a year, 20 years, you know, but I do think that sort of inquiry, maybe it's just for some people, but I find that I've approached all this with kind of curiosity. What's all this about? You know, where are we going? Is there a way of looking at this stage of life differently from the way in which it's sort of portrayed? And I know you've touched on this in your work a lot, Zena, but you know, there must be another way of looking at the world other than the box of, you know, super individuation and ego and, you know, me, and you know, just keep on acquiring and don't look back. In fact, don't look at anything really, just accept the next thing. And there is, of course, a community out there of people who are also asking those questions, using their creativity. And so that's kind of where I am at the moment. I'm sort of 2 years into retirement, and I'm working with various people exploring this in a loose kind of way, or a more focused kind of way. And I think this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life, you know.
So when I mean, you didn't end up on the golf course then, Simon? You know, I mean, I'm sorry, I know I'm being stereotypical here, but a lot of people in your space, it's almost like their dream world is to maybe have a place abroad and go playing golf, and you know, yeah. It's like we're kind of, certainly in the corporate world, we're led to believe that is kind of, you know, the utopia at the end of the retirement and coming out Absolutely. Of corporates.
Yeah. Absolutely, that's your reward, you know, and yeah, I mean, guilty as proven, you know, through pensions, certainly the marketing and advertising areas of. It's probably not so bad now, but certainly when I was kind of in that industry, the archetypal sort of thing was man and woman. You know, definitely man and woman, you know, because that's the world that was represented back then, on a beach. It's got to be a lovely sandy beach, looking out onto a blue sea, possibly with a yacht, might have been their yacht. They're holding hands, very possibly a dog or something in the background, but not really. It's an empty beach. Apart from them, maybe the sun's going down, and they're, you know, they're living the dream. And of course, the more I got involved in the real world of people and life and work, and you know, you think, well, that's for only a few people. But I mean, it's a really good point, because as part of my inquiry, you know, I'd talk to people about what were their plans, you know, people my age. Well, what are you thinking of doing? What are your plans? And you're absolutely right. I mean, a lot of them were like, well, I'm going to play more golf. Great. So just to be clear, that's every day, come rain or shine, and then what, you know? Or I'm going to go travel the world and drink gin and tonic or whatever you're doing, and that's lovely, you know. Or spend more time with the grandchildren, which is also lovely, to the grandparents or the grandchildren, or even their parents think, oh God, is it him again? He's come around again. Has he got nothing else to do? You know, so I don't want to I don't want to diss all that. I haven't just done it, but that sense of I kind of go, well, that's great, but what else is in your life? You know, what are your plans? You know, what beyond maybe traveling the world? And I think I was really quite surprised by the lack of imagination.
Mm.
Now, you could say I'm in an industry which sort of glowed with left brain, lack of empathy types. But stereotypes aside, I was just really curious that for people, men and women, who on the whole, money was not going to be too much of a challenge. So absolutely appreciate a very rarefied, privileged world, but the lack of or what I experienced is a lack of even wanting to think about it. I would have guys when I was leaving. It's certainly JP Morgan as an employer, and for a while I was kind of I'm done. I'm not going back. They would come up to me and say, the first thing they'd say is, "God, you're really lucky." And this is what, 7 or 8 years ago. And I'm kind of, well, why am I lucky? Well, you're getting out of here. I'm like, this isn't a prison. You can leave any time you like. And often their retort would be, well, I wouldn't know what to do with myself. So it wasn't usually, oh, well, I've got family, and it might be part of that, the reason, but that's just part of their story, because there was always money to be spent somewhere. But absolutely, it was a kind of, what is it that you're going to do? Now, of course, there were people who had visions, but they were even those sometimes seemed to be a bit small. They were usually around finance. It was more about, I'll be a non-exec, or I'm going to go out and join a startup and find the next unicorn, financial tech, whatever. I just kind of thought, well, yeah, but the world needs possibly more than yet another app to sort your, day-to-day finance out. So yeah, but I was just curious.
So it's interesting that you thought in lots of ways. It sounds to me like you were thinking, like you said, there was more of a curiosity to what else might be there, rather than these stereotypical things that we're led to believe are there. And when I was at the police, we used to run a pre-retirement program. And so you did 30 years in the police, so you knew, you're like, this is the, so when you joined, you had 30 years if you could make 30 years. And one of the phenomena, and of course money was a major part of that pre-retirement course, because they were going to get a lump sum and they were going to get a pension. So it's like, how are you going to manage yourself, all that kind of stuff. So that was a big part of it. But one of the phenomena of the police was that there was like a very large percentage of police officers that when they retired, they died.
Yeah.
And it's not kind of in the public domain, this, but it's a phenomenon. I don't know whether it's still a phenomenon, but I'm guessing it probably is. So it's almost like they don't. And certainly, like, my dad kind of retired earlier from the police because he was ill health retired, and then he went to work for the banks. And then it was like pension. It was like so focused on getting the money. But actually, I also, he collapsed when he retired, when he was made redundant from the banks. And he would have been in his mid-50s, I think. So there was almost like, I suppose my curiosity was like, whoa, hold on a minute. Yeah. It was almost like retirement meant death, decay.
Yeah.
It was like, ooh, so, and I had a granddad that was who'd been in the military, and it was a very, 70 years, and then you're out off the planet. he had a cut-off point that went,
right,
you're no good to anybody at 70, so
right,
get off the planet. And genuinely, that's what he did. He got off the planet. He saw a way out and he went. And it was just like, it was really, that's kind of what I grew up with. And the women seem to just disappear.
Yes.
So they seem to kind of deal with retirement easier, but then just disappeared into oblivion, almost like. So I suppose waiting for grandchildren to kind of arrive, to find another purpose. And that was, I'm talking about my small world, but that was kind of where it was at. And so, I'm quite curious to kind of go, what was it, do you think, that was feeding that curiosity? Because I know we've talked about you being involved in the Mankind Project as well. And so
Yes.
how long,
Yeah.
when did you find, and say a little bit about the Mankind Project, because I
Sure.
know it's very famous, but not everybody knows about
Sure,
it.
sure. I mean, actually, that point about, you know, what's my purpose? It's a question that sort of had the wrappings in a work environment of my purpose is to hit my targets, to, you know, do whatever I'm doing within the definition of my job, and really probably on some sort of score metrics to be able to achieve, you know, above target in whatever, in order to get a promotion, or so that was my purpose, to get the title, to get the new job, to whatever. And yet somehow that didn't translate across to what's my purpose in later life, you know, other than either, you know, do everything I want, you know, go everywhere I want. Or I mean, it's not always that. It could be just I want to tend my garden. You know, just I love gardening, and that gives me more time to be in my garden. But so anyway, that point about purpose, I think, is really relevant and valuable. And I'm guessing that part of that early death. And I've definitely seen it. I mean, again, being in the pensions world, you know, particularly men, there was this sense of they were so defined, or are so defined by, you know, their role, their position, their job, their story, identified with work, that when they leave that environment, you know, all they can really do is become that bore who says, do you know who I used to be? And you know, you hear it a couple of times, and then you're down the other end of the bar, you know, because it's just the same old story.
So
You know, so
that's about identity as well, then, is that like a strong connection to
absolutely.
identify to the role that you have? And I know this might be the wrong way of putting it, but my sense is that that's a more of a male thing than it is a female thing. But
so.
you know, that sense of kind of identity, because also it's the power that comes with that identity as well.
Yeah, and absolutely, and I'm you know, my involvement with Mankind Project really was around, and Mankind Project set up in the US, gosh, probably about 30 years ago now, really as a sort of response to the back then the women's movement, feminism, and not as a kind of, oh well, if you can do it, we can do it. More a sense of, well, where is the inquiry around what is it to be a man? You know, beyond the kind of stereotypes of, you know, just power on, suck it up, you know, be tough, etc., etc. And I think that was really a sort of, the invitation there was kind of for men to explore what it really meant to them at different stages of life to be a man, and a recognition that perhaps aspects of them were stuck in loops, boyhood or child loops. That so, you know, yes, in definition they were a man, but actually they were in many ways, you know, quite depleted or locked into behaviours that certainly weren't mature, and weren't serving you know, whatever their communities or their relationships. In fact, were becoming blocks and sometimes, you know, really quite hazardous blocks to them becoming really who they really potentially could be. And so, you know, that came over to the UK back in, I think, the 90s, and I got involved in Mankind for back in 2002. And you know, I've done various things with them, but latterly, I'm in I was going to say a subgroup. I don't know what we call ourselves, but it's called the Elders, which immediately people are, well, that's very pompous, isn't it? Well, what do you mean, the elders amongst men? You know, who do you think you are? But in a way, it was quite. It's quite sort of there's no entry other than when you get to 50, you can get in that club and call yourself an elder, which is ridiculous, of course. But
is it then? Is that how is that the criteria, 50?
It literally at the moment is any man over the age of 50 can join a circle that calls themselves elders. Now, things have moved on, and that I mean, so as soon as I turned 50, and back to this curiosity thing, you know, I was still working, but I kind of thought, well, this is really interesting. And I suppose partly I had those sort of images of the elder communities, the traditional ones of, you know, you definitely had to have a grey beard, or be some, you know, some wise person. You know, probably connected in some way with traditional societies or native societies or original, sort of connected to the ancestors in some way. And doing a lot of and pondering, and, you know, not rising to the bait of any young whippersnapper who was sounding off or showing off or whatever. Anyway, no, I mean, we now look at it much more as a conscious journey, I suppose, you know, a journey of inquiry, a journey of community, definitely to share. And there's something about being in a circle and being able to open up and just talk about how you are in life, an opportunity to, you know, see that other men, and obviously the same for women, have been through life's experiences, and there's loss, you know, there's grief, there's all the things that you've achieved and not achieved, and you know, what brings you together, and often it's a sense of, you know, who am I now, and what am I becoming? Who am I becoming? Do I like what I'm becoming? And behind that, I think maybe this is something that, well, I know you've again explored this, but that sense of, if there is that questioning, what is my purpose really? Then what's behind that is how may I be of service to my community, my family, you know, because I'm moving from it's all about me to other, and a kind of interdependence on other, and that wider perspective. And I've always found that, I suppose, really interesting. I mean, I think from childhood, I always kind of thought there's got to be more to it than this pretty rotten experience. And I've always felt a very strong connection to nature. I mean, I'm one of those lovely boarding school survivors, and you know, I was sent to boarding school, I think, at about 6.5 years old, and it was really not an environment to trust adults, let alone many of your fellow pupils. So I used to sort of go off into countryside whenever I could, and I felt that connection with the earth, and yeah, I felt safe in a way that I didn't feel in many other ways with adults. But you know, what I learned from that was, this stuff is really crazy. I need to find some grounding and something that's bigger than me, you know, and all this drama that's going on around me.
So yeah, and obviously that for me is part of eldership, is almost like reconnecting back to the land. You know, because as children we're much more in touch with the land and nature than we are when we land, then suddenly then enter into adulthood and the corporate world particularly. It's like they're so far removed from the land and from nature. So you know, it sounds to me like there's something in eldership for you of returning almost to back to that land and that place. And
yeah, there is definitely, and I mean, I think you know, the work that I'm now doing with others is to offer a facilitated experience work journey through either initially, you know, Zoom meetings, because we're all over the country, but also an actual weekend, which we call now the Gateway, Elder Gateway. And we used to call it Rite of Passage, but I'm much more kind of thinking now, and this isn't my original thought, and I know others have the same thought process of it is becoming an elder. If you become an elder, is it a thing? Is it an one-off event? Is it a rite of passage, and then somebody stands at the other end of that in the reintegration or integration and says, well done, Simon, you're now an elder? I don't think that is the case. I think it's a series of initiations in a way, and I think a series of events that kind of, you know, I am traveling ultimately on our own, and we're going to die on our own. You know, nobody else goes through us immediately holding our hand, but there is a sense of, you know, can I travel and have that inquiry and be there with other people, you know, and that's the community obviously you're expanding and building. So for this weekend, for instance, there's a whole series of things that we do, but a lot of it is around where are you in your life? What is it that might be getting in the way of you being the best version of what you want to become? You know, knowing that none of us are perfect, but something about where well, partly a question of where is your gold? Have you found it yet? and if you have, for God's sake, get out there and share it, because it's much needed in this world, you know. So if you've got some gifts, share them.
Right. Yeah. And I think, you know, when I was at Cranfield, we did the work around the hero's journey. And actually, a lot of the research I've done post Cranfield and Joseph Campbell's hero's journey is recognizing that was written in a place and the time, you know, like 1939 patriarchy, you know, to me, like there was no women in that space. It was a male journey, not a female journey. But one of the things that I realized as we were working with this material at Cranfield was that a real challenge for me, and it was really funny because now I can see, if you like, the why it was a challenge. But so when we take them through this journey at Cranfield over like this 10-day you know, program, you know, kind of where they were all together for 10 days, these executives, the idea is that we were taking them through this kind of eldership space, using Joseph Campbell's hero's journey as a kind of as a framework, as a loose framework. But when they returned to work, they found it very difficult to kind of integrate that somehow into the world that they were working in, particularly obviously the corporate world. So there was this kind of difficult passage back in. And what was fascinating was that the feedback was that, you know, yes, but how do we talk about this? How do we say the journey that we've been on? How do we, you know, because it was so not part of the narrative that goes on in a corporation and in a exec team and everything else. And so it kind of became a mystical thing that you came on, that you didn't talk about unless you were allowed into this secret club. And so we tended to have lots of people who'd been quietly, secretly recommended to that work that we were doing.
I love it.
But actually, when you know, one of the things that I recognize in my own experience of a rite of passage is bringing the boon back is actually probably one of the hardest things to do. And also one of the things that Joseph Campbell kind of skates over quite, you know, kind of flippantly almost, like, and then you bring it back, you know, what you've learned, your gold, your gifts, blah, 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 your wisdom, then you just kind of bring it back. But then you realize, like, trying to have conversations with people who've not been on the journey, it's almost like, oh, hold on a minute. And if that's your nearest and dearest, that can be really challenging. Because it's kind of, oh gosh, something's really shifted inside of me, and so how do I find ways of talking about that, or putting language to it, because actually it's a difficult thing to put language to. So I'm really curious, is that, you know, this elders group that you've got, and this kind of, and I absolutely agree with you. I've also been requested to do on, you know, kind of in person, almost like rites of passage. We'll go through it for, you know, for a weekend, and then you'll get your certificate to say you're an elder. It's like,
yes,
no, that's not going to work, because we know, don't we? It's not like a one-off event. It is these kind of, you know, ongoing movements, if you like, and I'm not even sure there is an end movement to it, but it is like ongoing movement. But how do you work with people in terms of kind of that, bringing the boon back from the passage, from the learning, from those experiences of going deep?
I mean, it's a great question in that sense of the journey, because for me, integration, a great buzzword amongst all the sort of renaissance of psychedelia, for instance, and the use of that in therapy, is, you know, like any experience, the experience is powerful, but it's how you integrate it into everyday life, you know. And to your point, to come back and go, now I'm an elder, you know, it's like, yeah, you know, empty the bin, shut up, you know. It's you know, I do think it is layers. I do think it's, and you know, in some aspects, the idea of a journey is for me a bit contradictory, because my experience is I go backwards, forwards, round the houses, up, down, you know, and it depends on what day it is. But I do think part of the process of integration is to have that community, to have that safe space where you can explore what comes up or what came up. And it could be grief, it could be it could be a sense of identity or a loss of identity. It could be actually spirit. It could be a sense of I fear, you know, I could fear that expansion into the mystery of life, you know, the unknown. It could be a sense of I'm losing my grip on reality, because all that I thought was certain is suddenly kind of not so relevant, or a bit scary, or just broken up in front of my eyes, you know. So I think to have a community where you can share those things, where there's kind of wisdom of the crowd in the best way, of people not absolutely not kind of doing fixing, you know, showering their opinions on you, you know, telling you what to do, you know, turning it all into, well, that's enough about you, what about me and my journey. It's encouraging, kindly listening. It's supporting each person in their journey in whatever way. And I'm really, really clear that everybody's journey is different, you know, even though there are common themes. Everyone goes through these things in different ways. And to your point about you know, Joseph Campbell in the context of, you know, men only, I agree. And I'm also involved in a community called Life Stage, run by a friend of mine in Brighton, and it's men and women, and exploring what it means to be, what does it mean finding yourself in the second stage of life, and the whole wonderful question of aging and finding one's purpose, and it's really based around a number of questions which people explore together in that community, in dyads, you know, asking each other these questions. And you know, there are no right answers, you know, it's just a kind of, how do you feel about, and it's not just looking at maybe the fears of aging and death coming closer. It's actually the sort of the spirit of life passing through each one of us in different ways, and going, you know what, I am so glad I don't have to put up with any of that nonsense anymore. I can just tell them to bog off, you know, whatever it is. And so there's quite a liberating side as well. And I mean, you and I have talked about this before many times, I think, is often there's an unleashing of creativity,
Mm.
you know, real kind of that curiosity, maybe that childish sort of childlike wonder of, I've got a bit more time to look around me, I've got a bit more time to really kind of listen and tune in, and to be curious, you know.
Yeah. Well, I think kind of the, you know, the world that we've created, particularly in the West, kind of compartmentalizes, like, you know, are you a creative, or are you a
Yeah.
corporate, or are you, and I've always struggled with those, you know, which camp are you in, you know? So I've always kind of, if I went networking in my kind of professional life, I, you know, yes, I was in kind of entrepreneur clubs, or because I was, you know, because I had my own business, or I was in kind of networking for small business, or whatever that might be. But at the same time, I was always hanging out around the kind of creative networks as well, because they were much more interesting to me, you know, because they were doing kind of making films or producing theatre plays, or but I remember kind of walking into that space and them going, you don't belong in it. You know,
Right.
to me, like, what are you doing in here?
Yes, yes.
And I kind of, you know, kind of managed to kind of hang out there without belonging. But at the same time, I never really felt part of kind of the business, because they were so compartmentalized
Yes,
between these. And I always
yes.
found that really difficult, because I wasn't. So it's like,
Yeah,
how do I belong in all? I can't belong in any place here.
that's a
Um,
lovely point.
and
Yeah, I
so,
really like that.
you know, and then obviously you know, you've really embraced your kind of creative spirit. But
Mm.
when did you find that? Were you at JP Morgan? You know, have you always been a secret creative then?
Well, yeah, I think it's yes. I mean, I think I was definitely a kind of high creativity, wear the suit, you know, play the games, and what happened? Well, actually, like often, you know, and maybe these are rites of passage, or certainly challenges in life. And I got divorced, and yeah, there was a sense of, God, what's this all about? And I remember that there was a point when I lived in West London, and I just threw this party, and I invited everybody. And before that, I'd had your point, compartments of my creative friends. I used to be a ballet dancer years ago, and then before that, I lived in a Buddhist community, and you know, so I had quite a few different sort of areas in
They
my
all
life.
those things don't go together, do they?
No,
JP Morgan, ballet
no,
dancing, Buddhist
no,
community.
no.
I
So I
know why
and
we
I
get on so well.
I do, yeah, well, exactly. So I just thought, to hell with it, and threw it all up in there and invited everyone. And of course, they all got on like a house on fire. It was brilliant. I think I DJ'd quite badly for the first time at my party. I did put some paintings around, pictures, and I remember thinking, you know, I'd drawn and painted for many years before that, but I'd always kept it quiet. You know, I mean, I literally had a garage where I used to go, and I called them my sort of what was it? Something really quite sort of shadowy and put behind. And actually, interestingly, coming back to how I'd kind of explore the creative in my work environments. I mean, I was a temporary head of the institutional business. Basically, they got rid of one guy and they hadn't got round to recruiting somebody else. So Muggins here kind of fell in and went, yeah, I'll do it. But what I did do, which I'm quite proud of, is I started our Monday morning meetings. So this is a sea, mainly of men, but women as well, of execs in suits and, you know, kind of hard nosed and all that nonsense. And I used to read them poems at the beginning of each one. And I remember so clearly, usually somebody within earshot going, oh God, Simon's reading another bloody poem again. And yet, ironically, they were usually the ones that after the meeting had snuck up to me and go, make sure nobody's around, and go, I quite like that poem. What was that one called? So what I learned from that was that actually, you know, there's a lot of people who have maybe explored that creativity in their lives before, but they were shut down. They were told they were rubbish, you know,
Can't make any
whatever.
money from that. You can't make any money from that.
Yeah, get a proper job, you know, etc., etc. I'm sure anybody listening to this will all have experiences of that. And so they literally, I mean, in sort of metaphorically, slid that under the bed. And so my invitation to them, because I then came out as an artist when I was at JP Morgan, and I even managed to get some paintings put up on the walls, which were just bare or full of rubbishy kind of images, and I had to go through New York to get permission from their arts curator, to put 3 paintings. I swore never to sell them, and I was ridiculous, but I got them up there. And then so people started to know, you know, I'm an artist as well, and often the conversation used to be, I used to ... I used to play the piano. I used to paint. I used to draw, you know, whatever it was. And so I get all conspiratorial with them and say, so what, are you still doing that? And they go, no, for the reasons just cited. And I go, well, here's what you might want to do. Why don't you just try that again? You know, maybe just sketch or photographs or whatever you were doing, and enjoy it. But don't show anybody. Don't let it out, and go and do it. And then I'd forget to have the conversation. They come back maybe even a few months later and to say, tell me about what they've been doing. And so the reason why I'm saying that is because I think there's something that in later life, and maybe, you know, this gateway of kind of exploration and permission to sort of open up your vistas, is a sense of, what did I love? Where was my passion? What brought me joy? What, as a child, why was I love walking off into the woods, you know, to go and explore stuff, you know, and it's a wonderful opportunity to explore all that again.
It's that capturing one's imagination again, isn't it? I think it's not getting caught up about, you know, can you draw, can you paint, can you dance, can you sing? It's more like, what captures your imagination? You know, do you like watching films? Do you you know, do you like reading? What do you like reading about? It's like being more curious about that creative imagination that you have. And I found when the first time I consciously realized I was in a rite of passage actually was when I was getting divorced. So
right. Yeah.
how old were you when you, well, how old were you, Simon, when you got divorced?
I've done it twice. So
Well, the first time, let's go there.
First time was when I was gosh, how old would I have been? Something like just short of 40. Yeah. So quite tough. Well, no, not quite tough, very tough. And that was a real, rite of passage. Maybe that is a good way. Everything just boom. Everything.
See, I think that is a rite of passage. I think it is. Because there's an ending of a life there, and you know, isn't there, at that moment? And I think we so often don't see divorce as a rite of passage. I mean, I remember I've told this story to my nearest and dearest, but I remember when I was in my early 20s going on a course with kind of management consultants, and I'd never worked in that field before, and so they were all a lot older than me. I was always like the youngest in that space, and there was a woman of a kind of probably late, I'd say early 30s, and she just got divorced, and she was still quite raw from that. And but she said to me, I remember her saying to me, it was the most painful and the best thing that's ever happened to me. And I was like, you know, because I was like still in that dreamy world of like, no, you get divorced, you get married for life, and if you get divorced, your life's over. You know, that's it. You want to get one shot. And that she really kind of stayed in my awareness in terms of what she'd said, and I kind of held that. Because that wasn't my upbringing, that wasn't the beliefs within my own kind of system. But when I was in my late 20s, and you know, that was a real rite of passage, but the creative space opened up then. And I think rites of passage are a creative passage. They are a creative gateway, because it's when we get into a space where we feel completely and utterly lost. It's that liminal space, isn't it, where we've lost our life as it was, and we don't know what the life going forward is going to look like, and we don't even know what we'd like it to look like. So we're not even sure, because maybe there's still some part of us attached to what we wanted it to be, and the grief of that loss is still very present.
Very, very, yes, absolutely. And of course, those are all powerful emotions, and emotions are welcome, you know, and that sense of, I mean, quite liberating to kind of go, I have no clue where I am. You know, Dante's, you know, I woke in the middle of life, in the middle of the woods, and you know, I mean that sense of crisis. You know, often you hear, don't you, of people really really kind of coming to themselves in a kind of new way. And I do think that for any deep work, where there is a willingness to self-examine, and with, you know, honesty and courage, but also, you know, some wisdom of getting older, it's kind of like, well, what are the burdens I'm still carrying? What are the stories? What are the beliefs that I'm, you know, there's that old chestnut that comes up. So not just the obvious stuff like, you know, deep down, I am not worthy, I am unlovable, or whatever, but how do those echoes play out in the sort of fabric of my life as I am now? You know, and do I really want to carry those till the day I die? You know, or can I, through creativity, through opening my heart, you know, get to a place of, there may be more possibilities, you know, then there may be, and there may well be people who inspire me. So, you know, these conversations, the connections that are possible, you know, and I think that's a really important thing, because it's a sense of gifting, of giving, of kind of exploration, rather than what may have done previously, what may have worked previously, is sort of taking status, I got, you know. Now it's more kind of putting out, and I haven't got, I don't know. and I am curious, and I'm not alone. I'm not alone, you know.
Well, and that, I think that's one of the things that it took me a long time to kind of discover it, because, you know, I was very much an incredibly independent person.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I think, and as I've got older, I've recognized the importance of community.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I don't just mean kind of a place where you live and the people that you know, but a sense of kind of being with kindred spirits.
Yes.
You know, together, who can kind of hold space for things that, and you know, so for instance, I know one of the things that we talk about in eldership is that, you know, grief is a collective experience. It's not just an individual experience. It's a collective experience. It happens to all of us, as in that, you know, we're all affected by grief, and therefore we need to share that connected grief in order to fully integrate the loss, you know. And so I think, you know, that's when we see the phenomena, don't we, of like when Princess Diana died, and everybody needing to kind of come out onto the streets and be with each other in that grief, even though we didn't even know who she was. It's almost like it brought up something in the social infrastructure that said, we've got something here that we can all connect to and grieve for, you know, because so I think all that kind of stuff I notice is much more part, particularly of eldership.
Yes.
Needing and wanting and longing for that connections, communities,
Yes, absolutely.
with each other as well.
I agree. And you know, part of that community for me, and back to this sort of thing about creativity and exploration, is that you know, the gifts that people bring. And it could just be the gifts of, I'm completely stuck or lost or whatever, but it could be their stories of in adversity, how they've kind of stepped up to a place of real sort of, what I suppose in archetypal terms, sovereign, you know, of that kind of leading from the heart rather than the head. And I, as you said, from an individual point of view, and much of my life, you know, power on, think your way out of it, whatever it is, you know, and then that sense of being able to step into something that is open and has a sense of deeper connections, I guess. And I mean, for me, you know, I'm realizing how absolutely vital to my life that is, you know, that when I am disconnected from that, that's when messiness happens, you know, my addictions, my behaviors, you know, and it's not, it's back to this thing about integration we talked about earlier. You know, this isn't just a one-off thing, it's bedding it down every bloody day to how am I, you know, am I acting out of a sense of well, actually duty, you know, kindness to myself and others, you know, am I in small little ways, you know, that I kind of think that's the test, not oh, I went on this incredible weekend and it blew my mind and now I have no ego. Yeah, whatever, you know. You wait till you just miss a bus. How's that ego of yours getting on then? You know? I know mine rears its head at the simplest of opportunities. But yeah, I mean, there is a sense of encouragement and challenge from being in that kind of community to go, come on, what are we going to do? How if somebody brings the same thing again and again, the burden of or behavior of, well, you know, with a kind of fierce friendship, be able to challenge that and say, so what are you doing about it? Do you need support? You know,
and we've noticed a pattern, you know, because it's hard to find our own, to actually see our own deeper patterns.
Yeah.
Other people, you know, see them much clearer than we see our own. So kind of having that mirrored back to us of kind of, are you noticing there's a pattern here? Because you know, I'm noticing it. So that's invaluable in lots of ways. Plus, obviously, the emotional support and the holding in difficult, you know, transitions, if you like, as well. Because obviously, it is, you know, those transitions of letting go of some of this stuff are messy. Because I think there's also that part of us that wants to go through a rite of passage. And we kind of keep our dignity and keep everything together all the way through it.
Absolutely.
And I saw so much of that kind of part of you that's kind of going, okay, how can I navigate this so I don't actually collapse and fall apart and make an absolute, you know, it's like, no, that's the whole point, isn't it? Is to do that, you know?
Yeah, I love that. That's sort of whatever happens, don't get messy, you know, don't get really messy. And you know, it's so true. And I mean, of course, the original, the model of rite of passage, that first stage, separation, you know, knock you off balance, get you disorientated, take away all those familiar things that you patch yourself up or build yourself up with, and go, now, you know, now what happens? I mean, you know, vision quest, going out into the wild, whatever it is, it's that sense of, you know, bloody hell, my normal sort of fail safes aren't there, you know. And then that sense of almost with a nudge or a little shove, down you go into, you know, the descent into that question of where am I, who am I, you know. And
I suppose it's like that as well. We talk about this in terms of, do we get called to eldership, or actually does life suddenly you know, put us in a situation, you know, fate takes a hand where we find ourselves in a situation where we lose everything. You know, we may lose our job, we may lose our partner, we may, you know, there may be a lot of death in the families, we may lose our parents quickly, or with a big, you know, a big G grief rather than a small G grief. So suddenly, you know, it, like you said, where all that infrastructure that we had kind of collapses. I think, you know, I see sometimes people step into eldership through that process, or there's this kind of real call, you know, where you notice, you know, some kind of, you know, things that you can't tolerate anymore, you know, to me, the way you think, you know what, I cannot, that's something quite intolerable to me now. And I actually getting to the point where I can't tolerate that anymore. So I'm going, you know, I just cannot do what I used to do before. Something's really saying no in a big way to this. Because, you know, there's a real big no in transformation, isn't there? That kind of goes, no, I'm not going to do that. And then you're into the quest that goes, oh gosh, what's beyond the no? I don't know.
Yes, and that's a lovely word, the quest. I mean, that you know, the quest for meaning, the quest for you know, who am I in the world and how may I serve? You know, that sense of the giving. You know, what is it that I have? My gifts, and of course everything that gets in the way. I don't want to do that. You know, I need to be safe. I need to be secure. You know, that good old safety officer that pops up regularly going, this is far too risky. I mean, you're going to go mad. You're probably going to go mad. You realize these people are already crazy.
You'll have no money, everything
no
will
money.
go.
Yeah, and I just will sit there going, I told you so. You know, you didn't listen to me. And I think that is the quest. It is that whisper, that invitation. I mean, David White talks about it, Mary Oliver, you know, that step, make I mean, David White's, what's it, begin the journey with the first step, make that one. That's the hardest one, that sense of, you know, come on. And I get, for some people that is just too terrifying and it's not for them. But I think that curiosity, that kind of what might lie beyond my familiar, the what I know about, or I think I know about, you know, to new friendships, to new horizons, and I think it's very necessary, because otherwise, my guess and my experience says that people sort of shut down, they close down, the world becomes smaller, and I don't want to die with my world being small. You know, I want to really connect with. I know something that you say, and very beautifully. I've got this actually printed off. Something about, we dismiss and diminish the modus imaginalis and the imaginary and imaginal dimension of our human consciousness, infanticizing the mystical world, which is an essential part of being human, and which inspires and informs deeper spiritual meaning, vision, and transformation. Yeah, give me some of that, you know, because I've done all the other stuff, and you know, and actually, just as a final point about the world I came from, is that I believe that those guys and girls were really hungry. Deep down, were hungry for something other than, I sit at the front of the bus and look at me, I'm the big whatever. Yeah, great. But I mean, a friend of mine, you know, had that experience of being, you know, very much one of the senior leaders in his business, and he retired a bit early, and he's still, you know, 4 or 5 years later, still trying to get over where did all my friends go? You know, where are all these wonderful people who were all over me for all this time?
Yeah.
Suddenly it's like radio silence, because they weren't really his friends. You know, they were just transactional, and, you know, no real judgment about that. But it was a real shock to him. So I'm kind of interested in finding and hanging out with people who actually don't know, and who aren't there with you know, their advice, or, you know, or even their opinions, or actually, if they want to share their beliefs, share it in a kind of, well, maybe I don't believe this anymore, or maybe, you know, maybe there's a different way of looking at things.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what I believe. Actually, yeah.
Yeah. I think there's
Fabulous.
something like that, you know, that support, that love from a loving place. I suppose that's what I wanted to say, that I experience, you know, that support and encouragement to explore eldership through, you know, as I say, maybe a series of rites and passages, and as you said so beautifully, that loss and that piling up of losses sometimes, but also the joy and also the humor. Sometimes people, I mean, I've heard such wonderful comments, not ageist at all, but just a kind of real wry, yep, you know, this is the craziness of it, and everyone just, nobody even says anything there. We're all just like, yep, what you gonna do about it?
Oh no, a sense of humor. A sense of humor is absolutely, you cannot do eldership seriously.
Definitely, yeah.
Okay, on that note,
Mm.
Simon, thank you so much for spending an hour with us and talking about your experience of Rite of Passage. That's amazing. And I have no doubt we will probably do some more of these, because I know we've always got so much to talk about. So,
Thank you, Zena. Yeah, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you very much.
okay, thanks, Simon.